what about? He's like, well, why don't we just do X? And I was like, why didn't I think of that? Right.
Mhm.
But to your point, I was not setting myself up for success. The timing of things, you learn how to communicate your interests, how to
Mm.
like work the system to allow you to move and how to kind of show up to allow you to move. And maybe that's another big mindset shift. It's beautiful to live in this world where all is driven is curiosity for curiosity's sake.
Hello, I'm Dustin PolyInnovator. Today I'm welcoming onto the Polymath PolyCast Julie Lavergne, who is a polymathic generalist, TEDx speaker, host of the Generalist Advantage podcast. This is a show where we talk to multidisciplinary people. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Dustin. I'm so glad to be here and that we get to chat again.
I know, I was on your show and that was a lot of fun. I definitely find that these kind of shows are too far in between. So when I saw yours, I definitely wanted to come on.
Yeah, thank you.
Link down
And
below if anyone's interested too.
perfect.
So on this show, the way I like to start things is to ask you, what was your mindset 5 years ago and how have you changed since then?
So if you go 5 years ago was 2021, right? Which many of us know is like kind of peak pandemic time.
Mhm.
And I was in corporate. So my mind was very corporate system, be a good corporate citizen, do my job. And, I trained, like I did, everything I did had to have a purpose, had to have an ROI. And it was very highly focused. And now that I work for myself,
Mhm.
I pursue my interests more without necessarily knowing where they're going to lead. And it took me a long time to learn to embrace that. The podcast being an example of not necessarily doing it for financial gain and not having this ROI or not understanding their ROI until I started. So I kind of parked it for a while and focused on, developing my business and things like that. So if I look at the mindset, that is a little bit what's really shifted is pursue your interests and you don't always know how it will nourish you and pay back. It's not always clear until you start.
And definitely, like you said too, the beginning of that kind of 5 year time span was around the peak of pandemic time. That's when this show started too. I was trying to take advantage of people being at home so much.
Okay.
And it's interesting to think about how whenever you come from corporate background too, there's entrepreneurs, but being polymathic isn't always encouraged in that environment.
No, and I love that I was an as you phrased it well, like intrapreneur, right? And so I was always bouncing around. I think I did like 10 to 12 different roles in like 16 years, kind of
Mhm.
following my interests, which was good that they allowed me to do that, but it wasn't without scrapes and bruises and frictions and, question marks along
Yeah.
the way. I just kind of had to battle my way through that in terms of following my nose and my interests.
I think on your show too, I remember talking to you about how like when I first started my first employer, I had 6 different roles at once being pulled
Yes.
between different directions. So I definitely resonate with what you're saying there.
Yeah, and somehow you learn how to communicate your interests, how to
Mm.
like work the system to allow you to move and how to kind of show up to allow you to move. And maybe that's another big mindset shift is now I could pursue. It's almost like, so back then I had a box I had to play in no matter what, right? Like
Mhm.
even if it was a wide organization and there's still constraints in how things worked. And now it's almost sometimes overwhelming that there's just so much. I could pursue almost anything that sometimes they say a little bit of the box is okay just to allow you to structure your work and have output. And I think we also talked about that too,
Yeah.
like being focused on output.
Yeah, output's definitely a big thing for me. But I think also too, I think I've been getting more comfortable with the idea of having a box and just learning how to market ourselves as multiple boxes.
Yeah, that's a good
and,
point.
and trying to think about like how those boxes overlap, like a Venn diagram in a way too. But I think a lot of people say like, oh, if we get put in a box, then it's like almost we're getting like a personal attack. And that's not really what it is. It's just a matter of the other person's brain needs to frame you in some way. When you introduce yourself to somebody, how do you introduce yourself to them? What's the context of your environment? Stuff like that.
Yeah, it's about connecting with others and how do you intentionally connect with others. And I think David Epstein that wrote Range, I think he put a new book out now that it kind of talks about the kind of constraints. So I'm anxious to read about that.
I need to get him on the show this season.
There you go. Put it out to the universe. Get him.
Yes. So does your background as an engineer play into your role as a founder?
Yeah, I mean, I don't do what I did in engineers, chemical. I don't do
Mhm.
that. But the two things that engineering helped me is one is problem solving, right? That's the classic of engineering. And then the other part was process. So especially from a chemical, they were the kind of process engineering. So in terms of now my career and as running my own business, what do? You problem solve and you try
Yeah.
to systemize as much as possible. So yeah, I think and it's helped me, the mindset, right, of how you go about problem solving, I think has been really helpful.
And we were talking before the call about Da Vinci, and he's definitely someone who is engineer. And we're talking about how like he would take this engineering concepts and put them into his paintings too. So your background engineering, those processes, the mindset, definitely being applied to your creative as well.
Yeah, and another so you're right. Like he talked about like that kind of art and science and how there's a blend for him.
Hmm.
And another area that I had this big kind of pivot and saw this blend was as I moved to engineering and then I became like an HR executive. So a lot of people are like, how did you move from there, moved? And I remember kind of taking engineering principles and try to apply it to people. Well, there's some benefits to that of like, the HR practice needed some standardization and process, but at the end of the day, it's humans, and you
Hmm.
cannot guarantee like input means output. Whereas in manufacturing engineering, for sure you build the process, most of the time it's going to work that way. But humans are more complex and they could go
Yeah.
in various ways and it might not happen. So it's a little bit again of that, not art and science, and but just science and humans and how sometimes there's,
Patterns.
yeah.
It kind of reminds me too. I think when I was younger, I would play a lot of video games and there would be different dialogue options when you're talking to a character or something like that. And I would sometimes employ that same mentality when I was talking to somebody, like what dialogue options could I choose? And would that bring us to a good outcome of conversation, if that makes sense? It was just kind of
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah. And video games is so helpful for that. Like, I'm sure you've talked many times how video games have helped you navigate life.
3D spatial awareness, hand-eye coordination, all that. Yeah.
Yeah, and just multiple scenarios and how to evaluate multiple scenarios and pick one, as you're
Hmm.
saying. Yeah.
Problem solving. Yeah. So when did you discover you were more than one thing?
Hmm. I had many hints along the way. For example, when I was doing my master's, I had one full paid engineering master's at a very reputable school, and it was on a topic that was interested enough. And I was
Hmm.
just like having this visceral reaction of like, what's wrong with you? Why don't you want to do that? And instead, I picked a very broad, generic master's at a okay university, right? In the end, because I couldn't fathom just that specialization. I was having this reaction to it, didn't understand what was going on. And then in my career, I remember like, okay, I done this job, what's next? And I did this job, what's next? And my mentor helped me understand. He's like, well, what if you like all the different areas of the business, you try to get experience in all of them, marketing and finance. And I was like, cool, right?
Yeah.
Again, not understanding. I thought I was just trying to understand all the pieces of the pie, and I didn't realize that what that played out. And I think it was until Range came out, like all the pennies dropped of like, oh, that's how you navigate. And that's why you navigate. And there's value to that.
It's interesting to know different aspects behind your business too, like all different arms. Because even if you are not an expert in it, you can get expertise in it. Then when you hire someone else, you can know the language that they need to know. Like with video editing, for example, I can't stand editing. I've hired editors in the past, but because I've done so many on my own interviews, I was able to tell them exactly what I wanted, which helps
Yeah.
them out too.
Yeah. But not everybody understands that. Like, I remember asking a lot of questions about how all these other parts of the business worked.
Hmm.
And they're like, why do you want to know? Like, stick to your lane. Like,
Mm.
why am I spending time explaining this to you? And then, I didn't understand. Like, I thought it was a perfectly reasonable question, right? Because for me, understanding, as you said, all parts of the business could only help me do better. But again, others don't see it that way. And so, yeah, you learn that along the way.
And sometimes it's not even so much a matter of like, you don't need to do it. Why are you asking me? It's more about how they're responding to the questions because they're thinking, oh, the founder, my boss, is testing me, make sure I know what I'm doing, when
Mm,
that's not what you're actually doing. That's just what they perceive. And so
right.
sometimes communication in that sense of like, hey, I know what you're doing. I just want to learn from your expertise. That's all. Like I'm not second guessing your ability to do it, which I
Yeah,
think
it's
will
a
be
really good
helpful for some
point.
people to
Yeah.
hear.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Yeah. And yeah, understanding everybody has their own lens and perspective of how they see through things. And our
Hmm.
goal is always just try to understand the others. Or
Yeah. I definitely come across that with people where I would be asking questions and they're like, why are you asking me so many questions? It's because I just want to know.
I know. I just recently had a chat with my mom about like I tried to understand who I was as a kid. Like was there indications as a very young child that you're going to be a polymath or generalist? And as my mom started to understand and listen to my podcast and understand what this was, she's like, it made sense for her because I could not stop asking why. Yes,
Hmm.
the 2-year-olds ask why, but she's like, I couldn't fluff any answer. Like you needed to understand every single thing about life. You were just incessant asking why, and I was like, okay.
Family backgrounds definitely. I think a lot of people in my family have polymathic tendencies too. And I was thinking of my grandma for a second there because she would be very inquisitive and ask a lot of questions. Part of that's
Mm,
just kind of her personality too. But I think that to me, I understand that she's just being curious or like asking about our lives. She's not asking in a sense of judgment or in a sense of like pecking at what you're doing. She's just wanting to know. But some of our family members might have misconstrued that as like being intrusive or something like that. And I was like, no, it's just curiosity.
yeah, yeah, and I mean back to Leonardo again. Like he was the prime example of being uber curious about
Yeah.
anything and everything. And um, reading his biography recently, you just kind of like, it's beautiful to live in his world where all is driven is curiosity for curiosity's sake. Whereas we're a little bit programmed now, like you could pursue your curiosity, a little bit the example of the mindset of pursuing the podcast for the podcast's sake and not because there might be a significant ROI or whatnot. But we are in a bit of a capitalist society of, there has to be a purpose and an outcome and a,
Hmm.
result from what you do. But for him, his whole result was just to satisfy his curiosity.
There was one concept on this polycast that I really loved, and someone brought it up to me that curiosity is a skill, and you
Mm.
have to keep working at it to keep that skill sharp. And I think that is something interesting to think about.
Yeah. And is there anything else other than exercising curiosity that I'll give you, what, interesting. So as we were reading the book, and we talked about this before recording, about the book had very precise description about paint strokes and
Hmm.
paintbrush, like a lot. And I found myself like rolling my eyes because there's just a little bit too much. And then it's interesting. Curiosity will, and then polymath generals will say, read things outside your norm, read things that is not necessarily your interest. So here I am reading a book on how to be curious and losing
Curiosity.
interest because it wasn't in my interest. So it was just like we're like, huh. But is
Well,
there
you could
anything else? Sorry, about how to like exercise
generate that.
curiosity.
I would say too, just like getting out of your comfort zone. So another guest
Mm,
came on the show too, and also Tim Ferriss has talked about this a lot, where he would go out in public in purple parachute pants, for
mm,
example, and just push yourself beyond your comfort zone. And I think that like out of your comfort zone kind of directly relates to curiosity too. I mean, I went
yeah.
to Vegas for a conference last month or a month ago, and I went to karaoke, and it was normal karaoke up until like 9:30, which is what I was used to. It was a digital app and digital music. And then at 9:30, they switched over to a live band. And even though I've been doing karaoke for a decade, I've sang with a band on the street. I should have no nerves about this. This live band was really good. And so I remember getting on stage and being really nervous and like
Huh.
having to get out of my comfort zone in that experience. So
Yeah.
despite the fact it's a skill that I'm good at, I was definitely curious to see how it would be to perform with the live band like that. And so I think that is a good example of going out of your comfort zone too. Because my
Yeah.
leg was shaking. I was nervous.
Wow. That's very cool. I've never even heard of that. And I think that's the example is I think we continuously put ourselves in new environments and we approach it with curiosity.
Hmm.
Like I think there's tons of example that, small and big examples in our lives.
Well, I think the next question here would actually be pretty good. Your experience going to 40 different countries. How did that indulge in your curiosity?
Yeah, and it's funny, you were just talking about like putting yourself in uncomfortable places. I mean, travel does that, right? Like you're in places nobody speaks the language, you have no
Hmm.
idea where you're going, you hope the bus or mode of transportation is getting you to where you want to be, you land, you're still not sure. Safety aspects sometimes to consider. And yeah, I think why you do it is because you learn so much about yourself. As a simple thing, going out for dinner by yourself,
Yeah.
going to a restaurant where it's packed and a whole bunch of groups of, cool kids or other people like you are having dinner and you're there by yourself, right? There's uncomfortable moments, but you learn of like, how am I reacting? Why am I feeling like this? What is going on? And then maybe it gets comfortable. But yeah, and then just obviously the curiosity in learning from others, but the uncomfortable part in learning from it has definitely expanded my horizons.
It's also making me think about the curiosity question you mentioned too. And like, I think that when you're reading the book, perhaps were a little burned out in that moment, which is why you lost interest too. Because the macro and micro, like in the macro, you were still curious, but in the micro, you were just too bored of that conversation. Or maybe like if you went back to that chapter now, you'd be more curious about it, especially after coming on this show or something like that. So it could have just been timing of it. I think a lot of people don't always understand that like our feelings change every day. When I was a personal trainer, people would come in and I had to quickly assess how that person was feeling that day and change what I was doing with them. Even if it was the same exercise, I might have to do it harder or easier based on their energy.
Yeah, I think that is such a good, yeah, realizing your timing and being, check yourself. And I had just this example today on something slightly different, but creativity. Like, polymaths are also known to make like various connections and be creative with new solutions. And lately I have been stressed and something has been stressing me. I have to host this event and it was just stressing me out. And it wasn't like, I don't know why I didn't come up with this answer, but my husband this morning, I'm like, what about? He's like, well, why don't we just do X? And I was like, why didn't I think of that? Right. But to your point, I was not setting myself up for success, the timing of things. And I think remember I was talking about that of like being aware with yourself of what is best timing to do various things. Because we're good to push through things sometimes too.
Mm-hmm. Something that between a few different answers, it kept making me think of a concept I talked about on the Polymathy newsletter I do, which was the juggling versus serialized approach. And I think a lot of us naturally lean towards the juggling, which is why
Yeah.
they always say the jack of all trades. And I remember, I think might have been on your TEDx talk, something like that. I remember you saying something about jack of all trades and then master of none. That's how, like, that's the phrase that most people know. But as you know, it continues, but oftentimes better than the master of one. So the context shifts. But I think a lot of people kind of still get that connotation of like, oh, if you spread yourself too thin, you do the juggling approach, you're going too thin, you're not going to be successful. If you stay consistent with all 5 of those areas or multiple areas for a long period of time, you will be successful. It's just a lot of people don't either have the patience or they switch too often. So like you said, having the knowledge of time management, but also knowing when to switch. Or do you need to be serialized and focus on 80-20 for a while?
Yeah, and what I love is I think back to again pursue your interests and the Venn diagram might build later. And I think I was so used to having the Venn diagram ahead of time. And what I've learned in the last few years was I think at one point I was pursuing 2, 3 different interests. And I was like, I have no idea how these intersect. They kind of intersect. Like if I needed to find a through line, I could, but I was kind of pushing it. And over time, and sometimes it's a bit of society's not ready for how you see the world, right? So you pursue these various interests and yourself and society, you end up with that Venn diagram of how it all works together.
Well, eventually those interests might, like, biotechnology, for example, like, or even like bioengineering, those two fields didn't necessarily intersect 50 years ago, but now they do. And so maybe you're just ahead of the curve in that regard too, but also, do they have to intersect? Like, do they have to be overlapping right now? And that's a question we have to ask ourselves.
Yeah, that not everything has to. It's okay to have different ones, and sometimes they will. And that's the beauty of us creating our life.
Sometimes I'll talk to people about their hobbies on this show too, because I think hobbies are just a fun name for another area of expertise. Even if you're not an expert in it, it could just be something you're just adept in. Like gardening, for example, may not have anything to do with your engineering or founder background, but you might be a gardener or you might be some other sort of like outside kind of green thumb kind of thing, hunter or whatever.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
No, I was like, I was going to go on hobbies and I was like, oh, I got nothing other than it's one of those. I was like, I've wondered in my life. I'm like, why don't I have better hobbies? I think his hobby has an indication that you do it regularly, where I do lots of things poorly.
But I mean, that's also something we can probably discuss there too. Like everyone starts poorly and it only takes about 20 hours to get relatively good at something.
Yeah.
As Josh Kaufman said.
Yeah, but I don't care. My gardens are okay.
Yeah.
I get some vegetables out of it. Now, do I know how to, have all the names of my plants and stuff? Sometimes I'm just like, I'm okay with the way I'm functioning at this level, right? And that's a choice sometimes of where you're going to put your energy and where you want to increase your skill set or what is good enough.
Well, and maybe down the line too, some weekend you're not happy with your harvest and you decide to spend the whole weekend learning more or something like that.
Yeah. Back to timing.
Yeah. So speaking of timing too, I'm curious because you have your podcast and it seems like you're making some content. What's next for you when it comes to content?
Well, interesting, the timing of us recording, which is just, you book things and things happen in the future. I actually also wrote a book. I wasn't planning on it at all. And I literally just, we're recording on, this is Wednesday, June 10th, and I literally just announced it yesterday. Just because it's been sitting there for months of me. I was like, should I say it? Should I launch this? And I've been wondering why I did that. And it's a bit the TED. I think it's a little bit of the pursuit of a new challenge,
Hmm.
right? I was like, I'm curious if it could happen. I'm curious what I would say. I'm curious if I could actually narrow the scope down to produce something, which is a bit of the same thing with the TED, right? Like we are, the way our brain works, right, is in like spider web. So it's so easy to for us, so many things are connected. And how do you explain something so small, right? Like in a smaller version. So I think the book is just another challenge similar to the TED. And somebody was asking me, well, why are you doing it? Is this for business development? And I mean, at the end, for sure, but I've never done anything really for business development. I've done it for myself.
Mm.
And when you do it for yourself, kind of business comes from it often, I find.
That's interesting to think about, and I think the background too with the whole TEDx and that kind of thing. What inspired you to go onto TEDx? What inspired you to write a book?
Yeah, again, I preparing for this and the questions I've had all along the way is, the answer a lot of people say is like, because I want to spread my message. My message is so important. I want to spread it. Yes. Like, yes, I have a voice, I have an opinion, and I'd love to put it out there. That could look in many different things, but it's also, again, the personal challenge of the ability to go through that. And the
Hmm.
example of why, if I was so hell-bent on messaging, I would have probably done a better job of marketing it. This is where I fall short. It's
Mm.
like, I did it, and somebody's like, "Oh, you're not half done." You're It's all about throwing it
Time for the
out there. And
podcast tour.
yeah, it's like slicing and dicing and throwing it out there and referencing it and all this, which is maybe because I'm still wrapping my head around I'm a content creator and what does that mean and what do I do versus pursuing interests. So, yes, part messaging, part personal challenge, making ourselves really uncomfortable. Can I share a little story about the
Yeah,
TED
sure.
as an example? I didn't realize this was so like different and everybody was like reacting to it. So as we're practicing TED, and I was really struggling, like, so I had done another big speech where you have to remember things, and I did freeze because sometimes when you try to remember everything in order and you miss one step, like your order is out and you're like, what do I do? And you could freeze. And then a 2-second freeze feels like 30 and then you crumble from there. So I was really worried about this happening because there's no prompter, no notes, no nothing, right? You need to know 14 minutes by memory with no guidance. And so I said, I need to put myself, my family's great for practice, but I need to put myself in an environment that it's strangers that makes me have a bit of nerves.
Mm.
And I had a week. I'm like, how am I going to drudge up random strangers? And so I put it out in my local community kind of Facebook and I said, can I literally go to your house and practice my TEDx? And I had tons of people respond. And everybody thought that was so creative as a way to practice. And for me, it was like, I had a problem. I needed to solve it.
Quick.
Found a
Yeah.
creative way to solve it, right? And so I think it's those examples that really drive me of like, huh, cool. That's how I responded to that.
I like that too. That's kind of the same mentality why I went to karaoke. So I wanted to learn how to sing, but I also wanted to learn how to approach strangers. So I would go to every table in the karaoke bar. Like it was actually
Huh,
an endeavor I was trying to do every single night I went out. And there was multiple nights that I would go out and I would just try to talk to as many people as possible. And so it's definitely a similar mindset there.
cool.
What on the other show I do, I talk to people who like have done TEDx or speaking engagements, and one thing we talked about is actually smart glasses. Because some of these newer smart glasses, like even realities, they have
Mm,
little screens, and you can't see it from the other side really, and so you can have a teleprompter right there in your eye, and it won't
ah,
show like when you're on stage.
huh,
Because these are Bluetooth glasses, for example, so you can listen to music or something like that. But
ah,
these don't
huh.
have a screen.
I'd be curious because I remember asking, like, 'cause some people might put like things on the ground for or just a few words to memorize, and they just like, no, we want you to just be fully present with the audience,
Mhm.
which that's a fair point. I had learned about the memory palace
Hmm.
and I never needed it because I could usually remember pretty well. And I was like, well, like I used every single tool and I used the memory palace and it was phenomenal. It was
Mm.
really good to memorize and follow through and feel comfortable up there knowing I had it.
It's interesting because I never got a chance to really make use of the memory palace technique. I think I've tried other memorization techniques and also just tried to raw memorize
Yep.
things. But I went right after that karaoke night I mentioned earlier, the one with the live band. I was more nervous about that than speaking on a panel the next day. And that was my first on stage kind of situation. It wasn't like a full on keynote like you were doing with the TEDx thing, but it is interesting to think about like when you're going on stage, sometimes just being in the moment present is the best thing. When I first started this show, one of the things I told myself I had to do is shut up and active listen. Like that was the skill that I was actively trying to learn. And I still have to remind myself to this day to like stop.
Both. It is
Yeah.
your show after all.
Yeah, but true. I don't want to dominate the conversation because I always think of it, it's an interview about you. And I think that best hosts to do add to the conversation. Like if you say something really smart and I add to it, then the person listening gets the benefit of both.
Yeah.
But if I have all these questions about you, I want to make sure I get through most of them, if not all of them, if I can. Most of
I
the
have
time
to
you
say
get
I
through like nine.
appreciated the research. You could tell that, like I appreciated that. And yeah, that's a form of listening to and paying attention.
Especially with this kind of show too, I think you would understand more than most people is that when you have a guest who is multifaceted, I feel like you kind of have to do more research. Because even on the creator interview show, I do a decent amount, but not as much as on this show.
Well, help me. Okay, so a little bit of we're talking about structure and winging it. A little bit what you're saying about, on the panel and being present versus, memorizing and delivering. And that's where I struggled with the show and let's say, the podcast is the research and having questions, but also seeing where the conversation drives us. So for example, I didn't send you anything. I did a bit
Mhm.
of research. I understood. I come to trust that if we have the opening context and opening purpose, that will unfold from there. It does mean sometimes it's a squirrel show where it's a bit like we
Yes,
talked about this and like,
sometimes.
boom, right? So how do you balance both of those?
You do have to indulge in the squirreliness and go on tangents, but you also have to know when to cut them off.
Yeah.
And I think that orchestrating a conversation is something I really enjoy about these shows. Like I really love recording these shows. And I think that even like sometimes even more than the creator show, because we get to talk about many different things and get to highlight your multifaceted life. And like that's one thing I brought up on the panel just a month ago. Is like I love seeing some people who come on the show don't realize that they're a generalist or polymathic
Mm,
person. And so when they have that realization, you can see that light in their eyes.
yeah.
And that's what motivates me to try to do the best I can. But I think that orchestrating the conversation is important. Like I jumped around questions. We've done 5 questions so far. After I asked the opening one, I jumped down to number 4. Then I went down to like number 10 earlier, then up to
Yeah.
2 or 3. And I jump around and oftentimes I'm not going to get to all of them. There's one question I make sure I ask every guest besides the opening question, which I don't always ask, like 9 times out of 10 I will. But it's just one of those things where you have to kind of just get a feel for the guest, like you were saying
Yeah.
earlier.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah. And I think that's the key. Yeah. Knowing when to pull it back and knowing too when you don't leave your audience hanging of like, they
Did they
said
say
something
something
really
cool?
good.
Yeah.
Like, why did you pull on that? Right?
Yeah.
Like,
I hate it when I'm listening to a show and someone does that too. And I definitely don't care for like shows with ads too. So I do this show and I don't put any ads on these shows, but I think that also because I want to be able to have that full conversation. And if there is a topic that we didn't touch on earlier, because we went on a different tangent, there's a whole opportunity cost mindset, which I don't like the idea of that, but that's a whole nother conversation right there. If we went down one opportunity and there was still another, there's a way to maybe circle back later on. And I
yeah.
try to take advantage of those circle back moments too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So speaking of that question that I ask every guest, and I want to compile this at some point actually, is like,
Yeah.
what is a polymath to you?
So I've contemplated this for a long time because I started down like generalist was the first thing that I learned and grabbed as an identity.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody started talking about being a polymath, and that felt uncomfortable until, and then you just read a lot about it and research, and of course, talk to a lot of people. And this is where I've landed. I've landed that there is a difference. There's a lot of similarities between a generalist and a polymath, but there is a distinction. And I think the polymath is where they go more in depth. So we talked about Leonardo, right? The ultimate polymath, but he pursued a curiosity, and he pursued it to the nth degree for no other purpose than that pursuit. So in some ways they become this hyper specialist in that, and then they might pull back and go down. And so I think that's where the generalist gets a bad rep of, being this like jack of all trades and just skimming all the topics. Where I think the generalist is, compared to polymath, is that they'll skim a topic to a point of a purpose. So a business outcome, get something done, move the project forward to what the purpose is. And then that's where they may go. And so I think that's, in my mind, the difference between the polymath. They will go down for no other purpose. They won't be an obvious reason, other than their curiosity. There might be a project, don't get me wrong, there might be a project or a business result, but they will go beyond a need. Whereas the generalist, I think, is a little bit more, I'll say, operational, and would rather maybe move around and understand all the puzzle pieces, even if they're kind of small, versus the polymath will have 2, 3, 4, and just have those kind of areas of focus.
No, I love the way you explained that. And I wanted to also mention too, I think hyper-specialization is actually sort of rare for polymaths, because we get to that 80 percentile, 90 percentile, and generally stop. And to be a polymath, like 3 or more areas of expertise. So if you're a specialist in 3 areas, you've only had so much time. Granted, how long you live and how much you've spent of that learning is also another factor involved. I think Da Vinci lived to be such a old age, and he stayed in impeccable shape too, which I think helped contribute his long life. You mentioned him as like the ultimate polymath. I wanted to mention, to indulge your curiosity a little bit, he's the ultimate polymath of the Italian Renaissance, but there's Ibn Sina of the Arabic Renaissance, the Golden Age of Islam. That's also another great example.
Yeah, and I haven't done my research on him, but
I need to go deeper too. I just wanted to mention him to you because it came to mind. It's like there's multiple different Renaissance. Like I think there was even like a Chinese one too back in the day.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is so cool. People don't know about the other ones.
There's so much. Yeah. And I know some people wrote about it, and I had a train of thought about the 80% and then pivoting. The difference, I often heard the argument is that the polymaths are more accomplished. And I really struggled. I said, like, what does that measure? Right? In the sense of, oh, well, they have a PhD, multiple PhDs. Okay, that's one form of accomplishment. And I remember kind of trying to identify and go, but if I did a major multi-million-dollar project in this area and brought that kind of huge revenue, whatever, is that a form of accomplishment in that topic? I would say yes, but I think that's where people struggle. And then and some people say, like, why do we have to differentiate? And I totally get that, but there's this like, what is that 80%? What is that measure of success or enough of an impact in that area?
I think even like writing a book on the topic is still one of those things, or multiple books, for example, like David Epstein, for example, in the topic of polymathy, he's written a couple books now, or a few books. And same with like, there's a researcher, Dr. Angela Myers, who I've talked to many times on this show, and she's really great, but she's also written multiple books. But what's interesting about the researchers is that they come from that field of academia. And so when they measure polymathy, they come from that point of view. And I've talked to them about this too. And they've actually gone out of their way to get past that kind of academic bias. Like, how do you measure polymathy outside of academia? So I really respect Michael Rocky and Dr. Myers too, talking about this. But I think that as someone who doesn't have a background of academia, my point of view is the opposite end, where I'm like completely solo self-education. You mentioned something earlier, and I wanted to talk to you about it because I might have talked to you about it on your show, but I'm not sure if I did. I created what I call the multidisciplinary spectrum, which allows people to kind of measure where they're at based on how many areas of expertise and how deep they are in that. Granted, how do you measure how deep you are in a specialty? That's more subjective, but it starts off with like the multi-potentialite, the potential to do many different things. Jack of all trades, you might be doing a dozen or more areas, but you're at a novice or a depth level. Then generalist, which are more maybe 3 to 5, 7 areas that more journeyman, middle level. Then you get to polymath, 3 or more areas of actual specialist expertise. There's a couple other paths too, but like that's the main path there.
Yeah, that's good.
Any thoughts on that? Because you were mentioning some stuff like that earlier between the generalist and polymath, which I think definitely aligned with that middle part there.
Yeah, I think just like that breaks my brain a little bit in the sense that I'm like, all right, well, I think I could do 3 areas of like more uber specialty. But again, what's the measure, right? It's
Mhm.
not a PhD. Is it a sense of accomplishment? Is it number of years in the domain? Is it number of books? Is it number of project? Like, how do you measure that? And then I was like, okay, then 3 to 7 other kind of interest areas that I've produced a form of results. So yeah, I generally agree, and I totally see where you are. I think it's just I think
Measuring is the issue, yeah.
yeah.
Why don't, for the sake of you and the audience, since I was explaining it, why don't I just share my screen real quick?
Great.
So you can kind of see the whole scale here.
Okay. Ooh, adisciplinary T-shaped. I don't know if you follow the conversation. There was a few years ago where a lot, like I feel like, at least in my world on LinkedIn, like it was all booming, and there's like the T shape, the W shape, the M shape, the O shape.
I
Like everybody was
really like all those different terms, and I wanted to try to like incorporate. If you've really aligned with multi-potentialite, or maybe adisciplinary or T-shaped, where are you on the spectrum then? And I think
right.
that's kind of a fun way of going about it.
So how have you? So you've shared this with people?
I made a whole mini series about it on my channel, and I shared it on my website too. But I think that I need to update it, especially since I don't have numbers. And I think that would help a lot of people really understand where this is coming from. Like, I came up with proto polymath because I think that for me, people have called me a polymath, and I do have 3 areas of expertise. But you mentioned kind of earlier the ego aspect to it too, and so I thought proto polymath. I'm on the journey to polymathy. That's what
Yeah,
really
feels more
matters.
comfortable.
Feels more comfortable, and that way people want. It's more about like actually the other person's comfort, because I don't want them thinking I'm egotistical by saying I'm a polymath, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah,
And so,
exactly.
yeah, and then generalist is nice too. I do like generalists more than some other terms, but even expert generalist or leverage generalist, as Tim Ferriss has talked about too.
Right. Yeah. And I think, it's really interesting that I find, the specialists go on of like really defining terms and buckets and making sure there's
Yeah,
buckets, right? And we're like, we blend them all, right?
yeah.
Like whatever. And so it's interesting how we're trying to define our own self, where in the sense is we should also just promote this way of thinking and this approach to a career and etc. I don't care. I don't care if you're a polymath generalist, but whatever your term is, let's just
Yeah.
combine to help change the systems that need to be changed to embrace us.
I think polymath makes the most sense, especially living a polymathic life. Like if you're anything before polymath, you're polymathic, and that's okay. Like you can say you're I say I'm polymathic because there's no ego attached to that. It's just a type
Yes.
of lifestyle. And I think that there's a lot of people in the polymathy space who don't like the multipotentialite word, and some of the multipotentialite words people don't like having the idea of having to specialize, because they're very much on the whole freedom aspect behind it, which is fair. But I think there is a point of like you have to do something with those fields too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. And then the reason I was asking if you share it is,
Yeah.
is there a, because I think a lot of in this what I'm seeing is a lot of people are coming out with their kind of mapping, their research, their bucketing, their whatever, which is cool. And I was just curious of the feedback you've had, if aligned with others or others see it differently, which I'm sure I know the answer now. There's a
No,
lot of alignment and some differences.
I think you're right, and the question was also right on the money too. I was talking to Michael Araki and Dr. Michael Araki and Dr. Florian, who are a couple of researchers in the space.
Yep.
They made their own charts, and their charts are very much polymath centric. And so like they're talking about how do you quantify the creative polymath versus like the hard science polymath or something like that. And I think that the scale needed to be a little bit bigger. So we were kind of deliberating about how does that scale, when does it start? It's interesting.
Ah, fun.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
love this. It's like a whole new domain. Like it's
yeah.
fun following the researchers. I remember thinking early on, I'm like, if I had to go back and spend years just doing research on this, maybe it could be interesting, but this is where I know the limits of my interest. I
Yeah.
wanted to like dabble and continue. I think I was more business oriented than research oriented, but I like to follow what others are doing.
Have you seen the panel that I hosted with those researchers?
No, I didn't know you
Okay.
did that, because
Yeah.
I've spoken to Florian. I do track Iraqi, which even gave me an idea that I should probably reach out to him for more of a chat. But yeah, no, please do
So
share.
I'll send it to you, because I hosted the panel. I was the only panel I've ever hosted too, no less. But it was funny because it was people in my space, but I had interviewed 2 of them, trying to get the third one on the show. So I knew all 3 of them really well. And so it was one of those things where I think it was a perfect kind of balance because I was able to know who should talk about what. Yeah, it was nice. Talk about orchestrating the conversation. Imagine 3 of us on the channel. I have been wanting to do that. There was, is it the Delphi method or something like that too? Or even Socratic method. I thought about having what I call the triple threat polycast, where I had 2 or 3 people on the show and having like, even if you have the same expertise, all 4 same specialties, that polymath is going to be different. So how do they contrast? That just would be really fun.
Keep going. Those are interesting, Dustin. I think you should continue those.
Well, thank you. And speaking of podcasts, what got you started to create the Generalist Advantage podcast?
When did I?
Or what got you started on it?
Oh, yeah. Too. So I'm trying to, I spend 10, 20, 12 years or whatever figuring like, who am I in this career and getting kind of beaten down in various ways. Read range, right? Light bulb. Post on LinkedIn. I had no LinkedIn game back then. This was like 6 years ago or whatever.
Okay.
And like hundreds of people responded. And I was like, ooh, I hit a nerve. Like usually I had 2 likes at best before in my once or twice a year posts, right? And so that's interesting, that algorithm then, right? I had no presence, and then boom, like, and then so I wanted to reach out and talk to all these people. So I went on this like world journey talking with people all over the world about being a generalist, and then you start finding all this commonalities, etc. And I was like, that was cool, right? And then, but I came from a world that content creator was not in my range of thinking at all. And somebody just turned to me and goes, why didn't you record those conversations? You'd have a podcast. And I was like, so let's do that again. and then so that's why. But it took me a while to, once I agreed to do it, it's back to what I was saying, is like, oh, no. I need to focus on the business and creating things that bring me money and blah, blah, blah. So I focused over here and said, I'll get to that. Man, yeah, maybe I'll get to that. I put it on a shelf, and it was niggling at me for such a long time. I was just like, just get it done. Like, just do it. And it's been so lovely. So that's why I think is at the same time, like others were like Millie was starting, had started hers, and I had all these kind of coffee chats.
We're trying to get her on the show too, but she kind of keeps blowing me off.
I was hosting lots of different chats, and so I just started small on the Generalist podcast. I said, even if it's just mom that listens, then great. But it ended up being so much more than that. I'm not saying it's big. At your point, I'm not looking for money. I'm not, but it's been rewarding in many other ways.
I think that's something that might help you from my experience is I talk about this on the creator channel about how you create your like content ecosystem. How do you make a YouTube channel? Yeah. And the podcast, to me, like there's a lot of podcasters, so that's their main thing. And that's a little bit different of a mindset. But for us, you and I, it is our tangential thing. And we love doing it. We do it partially for our own sakes, but also partially because it's like getting people in. Because you get to talk to people like us. It's a good feeling. But the way I viewed it is like solo content is the main top of the funnel. That's what's going to bring people in when it comes to SEO. That's what's going to bring people in when it comes to affiliate marketing. So making money off of those videos. It's also going to lead people to your book or lead people to your actual business. Yeah. But then there's also shorts, and you don't want to leave out on that because that's what's going to open you to new people, even beyond just SEO. But making shorts on our own can be really annoying. That's when the long form content comes in. So whether you're doing a live stream or a podcast, the podcast itself may not be monetizing, but it's networking for one. So when you meet those people in person, they can introduce you to other people, and it's also fun to network with people around the world, like you said. But then it also generates a ton of clips, and that's what's going to give you shorts, which is going to give you more traffic and more views. And
Yep. Okay, I've got a question for you. Yeah. I've been debating since you're like, let me help you. I'm like, help me, Dustin. So back to your point, I have a lot of content. I have lots of videos. My struggle is turning that into valuable content, creating the shorts. Not just throwing a long form video, but actually having an opening and like so all the other bells and whistles that need to go with it.
Like improving the long form or turning it into shorts?
Both.
Oh, okay.
Not like taking the raw footage and, slapsticking the title and the putting some music, whatever else. And so I struggle. It just sits there because when I'm not paying somebody to do it, because it's like, well, should I not? Yeah. So what's the ROI? And I was like, well, why don't you just do it yourself, Julie? Like, easy enough. I never prioritize that. Years now, it's not getting prioritized. So
Okay, well, I'll say this. I hate editing, and so getting these interviews out sometimes is really painful for me. And it's not because of the actual content itself, it's just because I don't get started on the actual act of editing. Once I do, I generally get it done. The only thing that motivates me is actually you. Like, you motivate me to get these interviews done because I don't want to let you down as the guest and make you wait a long time. And that's what helps me get that out. When it comes to, I guess you could say, like, the actual quality of it, like adding animations and stuff like that, I still need to get better at that. I've used tools like Firecut and other like AI editors to
There's
help.
so many AI editors, yeah.
None of
But
them
there's
can
still a
really
cost.
do. Yeah, well, I think Claude, I've heard good things about Claude editing that can maybe help a little bit, but like Firecut can't really do a whole lot. I had access to it because of the YouTube conference. They gave it to me like a free month or whatever, and I was able to not mess with it as much as I want. Even at full use, it didn't really do a whole lot for me to improve the quality. Like maybe chapters, like it'll do a screen, like here's the topic of this chapter or something like that. But that was like the only thing I really added to it besides helping me expedite certain things. So for me, I'd rather just do some of those things manually. Like finding the highlights. Like if you say 3 really awesome things in this call, which I know you did, I try to find those moments, 10 seconds of it, pop it in the beginning. Then I have a 8-second animation I put in right afterwards. I can help you with that. I have a tool that I use called Video Bolt, where you can make like intro animations. That helps a little bit because you want to have actual content at the beginning so people can stay hooked. I see so many podcasts just do like their intro animation at the beginning and people leave right away. And then I go into the intro, and then throughout the whole cut, I just cut out the ums and ahs. I cut out the long pauses. I don't cut out really any of the meat, even if it is maybe tangential or maybe not related to the actual topic of the episode. I feel like everything should stay. That's my personal preference. And at the end, I'll throw in an outro animation or something like that. But when it comes to the clips, I just use Opus Clip, to be honest. And I try to be picky about some clips, but I generally go a little bit more shotgun approach, go wide with them.
Right. But just sometimes you say you'll pay somebody to do it, and that's where I think I struggle. Or even paying the tool, right? Like some of
people pay me to do it for them.
There you go.
It's funny because I think that like a lot of people just don't want to get around to doing it because even like using Opus Clip takes time. I will say it's really funny because this is a tangent. This whole last month, I've been making videos, at least a little bit. I've been very slow to creating content. I've been very unmotivated this last month. However, I have about 15 videos I need to put into Opus, including a previous interview, which is really upsetting to me that I took that long to repurpose it. But I also have other videos I need to put through, and I have multiple different streams to put them on multiple different channels. And so just even the act of putting it into Opus and then going through all the clips. Yeah. But I'm going to do it this week, but I just think that like that is something that happens too. I get that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's for me, how do you prioritize that? Because I think there's other things that I feel might be more marketing rewarding, let's say, because I do put out the podcast. It's mostly audio. Getting it to video has just been this like, until I could systemize it so it's like a running machine.
But you're not going to be able to systemize it until you have the experience with video.
Yeah.
From the beginning, I had video for my interviews because I knew that was going to be important for repurposing. If you have just audio, then you have to add an extra step of making a visualizer to put it into Opus, for example.
Yeah. No, everything's video recorded. Everything's video. It's just sitting there.
So, for example, you could just toss in the raw video as long as they're both parts in the same video, put them side by side, and then put them into Opus and get the clips out of the way. Editing them, are you going to how much audio editing do you do then?
No, I don't do it. I pass it to my husband.
So does he cut it down at all, or does he just clean up the audio? No.
I'll say if it needs cutting, but I try to do it straight.
Yeah,
and I get it. I also get. I feel bad. I feel like I didn't want to make this like a how to create video thing. It's a little bit of like how do you? It's a bit of like that prioritization question in terms of your time, and then if you can't prioritize it, then you could pay somebody to do it, but then that becomes pocket on something that is not revenue generating.
I just don't think of it too much in the business sense of about revenue generation. I just have like the mindset of like I know there's time, opportunity cost. Like that's kind of the mindset that you're having there, but when it comes to the editing, like I was asking how much you cut it down. If you're just popping it out, then all you got to really do is maybe like I try to do the smallest amount of editing possible on these shows.
Yeah,
and even then,
put intro, outro, good.
Well, I would say before the intro, the hardest thing is find those moments. Like just try to find. Like that's what the biggest podcasters are doing. I actually was one of the first ones doing it even before like John Uche and some of these other big podcasters would do it. And actually it came from the video game world where a lot of video game creators would find 3 moments of
cool.
when they're about to die, put it at the beginning. It's cool.
Ah.
We should probably like cut this out and put it on the creator channel. That'd be kind of funny. Like a little coaching moment. I would just say you just need to start doing the video. And I'll say we're using Riverside right now. You are side by side right now. If we export this into like a horizontal video, there's 2 options. We can either have the zoom option where we have both of our full canvas side by side, and then there's 2 black bars.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't look very good. And I used to do that, and I used to put a background in, and that would add steps to my editing and make things annoying. What I realized is, like, down the line, especially some of the bigger podcasters who do it, they just cut out this section here. My whole half becomes half the screen, your whole half becomes the other half of the screen, and it does it automatically in Riverside now anyways, but that's how I would export that. But if you take that export and put it into Opus, then you're going to be cropping it again. You're going to be zooming in again. So the quality is going to be lower. This is not just Opus, this is any tool or even like a regular editing tool. So what I end up doing is I export it twice in Riverside. I'll export it vertically and I'll export it horizontally to try to maximize the quality of that vertical export. Okay. That's something that helpful.
No. So that should go on your creator channel as advice.
Yeah. But because of that, though, now I have a higher quality video vertically, and it takes, like, if I just cut out this and you're missing out the poster and stuff like that, on the square of the vertical, you can at least see part of the poster, part of the picture, more of your background, your range book. Yeah. Let's get to the next topic here. I don't want to.
It's all good. I was just like, super interesting, because I think it's interesting. I hit an area of expertise for you where I'm still a little bit back. I'm like, I don't know if it's worth doing right now.
I think this is a slow start. That's the best thing I would say. Like, you can't do a whole lot until your skill level increases. I talk about that actually about my creator equation, like just getting to a certain skill level and trying to accelerate how much reps are you putting out, like how many content pieces you're putting out so you can get that skill level quicker. Yeah. Next question here is, how does 8-ball clarity help people?
I like to say, I like creating aha moments. So I think one of your questions that we didn't touch is like, what's an area of expertise or something like that. And what I love is critical thinking, and I love like metacognition. Like, how do you recognize your own thinking? What are your processes around that? And especially with AI now, could we have had a conversation without AI? Oh, here we go.
I had a question that I skipped and it was about AI.
It was like how we think is so much more important, so we don't, offload to AI. But that recognizes you, like, say, well, how do you make decisions? And I've done this to hundreds of leaders, and they're like, oh, I evaluate some facts and I talk to people and I do pros and cons, and sure, but how do you make truly big, complex decision, write out the process, and then write out the process as a team? And I think that's kind of what I help people do, and all the different types of thinking. If you're thinking about a risk versus thinking about a decision, those are different processes. The process of thinking of those things are very different. I think people don't recognize that. But I think in this world now, in any work, content, business, etc., you have decisions you have to make. You have risks you have to manage. You have complex situations. You have problems you need to solve. And so understanding those levers of what you do in the process allows you then to use AI. It allows you to know, where am I optimizing this with AI, and where is it staying on me? So in the specifics of that looks like, I love strategy. So I love working, because a strategy is the ultimate decision that people need to be making and prioritizing, scenarios based, understanding risk. So I definitely do a lot of strategy, leadership development of how they're going to highly function as a team. And then also I do work with Scarlett Nova, which is an AI adoption. So we're talking about the Venn diagrams. Maybe this is a time, if we have time, to talk about how my world collided in the last 6 months, 8 months. So I was pursuing 8-ball, which is all mostly about strategy, critical thinking. I was pursuing Generalist, didn't see huge overlap, but I was like, fun, keep those. As I was pursuing strategy, the last year or two, the big thing coming out of strategy was like their expertise, and and we have to do something with AI. They had no idea. It was just this black box, right? So then a company approached me, would you like to work with us? Because AI is very much about change management, a lot about people, which is a lot of my background. Okay, so now I do strategy. Oh, you have a problem with AI? And I was pursuing AI generally, but it didn't overlap until I have this role. And more now, when I work with leaders and AI, they talk about, how do I get a broader thinking? right? How do I approach this in a wider lens, especially for executives? And so now here's all the generalist conversations that are coming in. And I was like, bam, right? Like I was just like, here's my Venn diagram, here's my focus. I've got strategy, AI, and generalist, and I'm a happy bunny.
It also kind of makes me think of like we talked about earlier about the different content types. There's the normal video, the long form, and the short. You have different parts of the channel that all feed into the same thing. And then once you had that realization, like for your business, all three of those different parts kind of became that holistic thing.
Yeah, but I think I also appreciated that you're probably the only one that understands all those parts, because from the outside, people are only seeing a small sliver of that and they go, cool,
Yeah.
but they're not understanding the big canvas.
Yeah. I mean, I think there could be ways to market it. Like maybe if you create, like I showed you the canvas earlier of the multidisciplinary spectrum, maybe if you could make a mind map like that to help people visualize it, that might be interesting too. But also the aspect of marketing, like when I first started my my main channel, the one you're on now, it was about polymathy. It was about knowledge management. However, those topics were like a DNA helix. They were kind of spinning around each other, but not really fully merging. Eventually, I changed marketing knowledge management for polymaths, and it gave me the permission to talk about both, but it made people's understanding of the channel a little bit more concrete.
Got it.
Where can people find you online?
I'm on LinkedIn, so Julie Lavergne on LinkedIn. I have a website, but most of the time is best to find me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. I got the link down below for you. What would be a call to growth for people to do today?
A call to growth. I'll go with like a little bit of like, assuming all your audience is already broad thinking or more interest broad thinking, I think is just that metacognition. Like I think we need to understand a little bit more what makes us human, how we think. And, there's so many things that happen naturally in our brains, but I think trying to figure out where that comes from, I think will be helpful moving forward.
Love that. And so once again, this is Dustin, PolyInnovator, and Julie on the Polymath PolyCast. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Dustin, for having me.